training institutes that we have in this country.
Thank you. That ends general questions. We now move to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Engagements to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Joanne Lamont.
Thank you. Presiding Officer, this week the Institute of Fiscal Studies, a respected independent think tank often quoted by the First Minister, said that because of falling North Sea oil revenues and an ageing population, an independent Scotland would face significant tax rises or public spending cuts. Now, I don't suppose any of us really here imagine that we're going to get an answer, but with a cock of the head and an indignant sideways look, could the First Minister tell us why the IF is scaremongering like this?
First Minister.
Well, I thought we'd do, as the IFSS report itself indicates, is we'd increase the Scottish tax base by growing the economy and generating extra revenue. I don't know if Joanne Lamont's aware of this, but on the model that IFS were using, that's the OBR model, it suggests that the United Kingdom will be in deficit for every one of the next 50 years, for the next half-century. And then indicates that UK governments will have to raise taxation or reduce expenditure to meet that sustainable position. That's what the model tells you. I think instead of looking at that, what we should be looking at in Scotland is how we change the circumstances of this country by using investment to grow the economy to generate more jobs, more revenue and give us a sustainable future.
Joanne Lamont.
The IFS is just asking us to look at the real world. Why would we bother with all that malarkey when we can just make things up as we go along? But presumably, how we'll deal with an ageing population will all just get younger under independence. £300,000 worth of oil of Olay for each man, woman and child. Because, of course, the IFS says that even in their most optimistic of forecasts, income tax would have to go up by 8 pence or VAT rise to 27% to fill the fiscal black hole. Now, chuckling at his own jokes as he likes to do, and selectively quoting lines that suits his argument, selectively, I'm sure he's looking for them right now, selectively quoting lines that suit his argument, could the First Minister tell us why the people of Scotland should believe him rather than the evidence of their own eyes?
First Minister.
Well, let's talk about what's agreed in the IFS report. Page 9, which confirms that Scotland pays more per head than the UK in terms of tax at the present moment, or page 11, which confirms that currently Scotland is in a stronger fiscal position than the rest of the UK. I'll quote you exactly. The average revenues raised per person in Scotland, £11,079 and 13-14 prices were higher than for the UK as a whole, £9,000,342. So the IFS has validated an argument which I've brought to this chamber many times from the Government Economic Revenue Service, the GERS forecasts, that Scotland more than pays its way in the United Kingdom at the present moment. And that, if we take the last 5 years, has amounted to many billions of pounds, which could have been invested in Scottish public services, or alternative could have lowered the rate of borrowing, or a combination of both. And because of our position with the United Kingdom, these resources haven't been available to the people of Scotland. Now, our case is a simple one, and that is, instead of not having these resources available, why don't we invest in the economy? Why don't we grow productivity, grow our exports, make sure we've got the growth in the economy which generates more revenue, and then we will not be able to have the dreadful future forecast over the next 50 years for the UK by the IFS's own forecast, which says it will be in deficit for the next 50 years. Now, Joanne Lamont says that at Independent Scotland, we're going to change the age structure of the country. Yeah, how would we do that? Perhaps we could do it by allowing young Scots who want to work in this country to have the opportunity to stay in Scotland. Perhaps we could do it by not kicking out the country the many skilled young people who come to study at our universities, desperately want to work for a time or permanently in Scotland, but are kicked out by the Borders Agency. Wouldn't that help change the age structure of the population? But of course, these things must be right because they're controlled from London, and Joanne Lamont backs control of immigration policy from London, which, of course, would consign us to that populace. In the central forecast of the IFS, which I've taken from the Office of National Statistics, it postulates population growth in Scotland of 4% over the next 50 years. The population of Scotland has grown by 5% over the last 10 years. But what the IFS does tell us, if we remain trapped in the policies governed from Westminster, then we've got a very poor prospect indeed for Scotland. If we grow the economy, put the investment in, then we have a bright and certain future.
Joanne Lamont.
Another of the First Minister's tricks is to go on and on answering a question he wasn't asked. And only the First Minister, when the IFS says in their most optimistic of forecasts income tax would have to go up by 8 pence or VAT rise to 27% to fill the fiscal black hole, only the First Minister could say the IFS validates his position. It does not. Indeed, I wouldn't be surprised if there are convicted Enron executives across the United States at this moment planning appeals saying, I know we fiddled the figures, but Alex-Salmond has taken it to a whole new level. With every economic paper the First Minister publishes, Fred Goodwin must feel a day closer to redemption. Each prospectus must make Bernie Madoff spit out his prison breakfast in admiration. So, feeling free to quote a former Labour Chancellor in a falsetto voice, or digging up a blog he was trawling through last night, or some more selective quotes like the last few we got there, can the First Minister just explain this to us? Why is it that the fiscal black hole the IFS exposed actually doesn't exist, and there is nothing to worry about after all?
First Minister.
Can I point out, Joanne Lamont, I quoted from the IFS because I do think it's very helpful in agreeing the current position. The IFS backs the Scottish Government figures, the GERS figures, in showing that Scotland more than pays its way within the United Kingdom. If we took Well, I hear from the Tory benches it's not true. I've quoted one quote already. The quote on page 11 points out that Scotland exceeded revenues by £1,550 per person. Now, that is a direct quote from the IFS, and therefore let's agree that over the last 5 years, over that period, Scotland has more than paid its way within the United Kingdom. I pointed out to Joanne Lamont that I don't think the population structure of this country is a given. I think the population structure of this country would be enormously improved if we didn't refuse young Scots an opportunity to work in their own country, and if we allowed other skilled people, many of whom we've educated, to work in Scotland. That, to me, would bring about a substantial, important change in the sort of challenges facing all European economies that the IFS was indicating. Now, I've got a substantial admiration for the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Unlike Westminster politicians, including Alistair Darling, who have dismissed various reports of the IFS, or the Deputy Prime Minister, for that matter, who accused them of, this is Nick Clegg, distorted nonsense, taking the highly unusual step of attacking the Institute of Fiscal Studies, describing its methods of measuring the fairness of the Coalition's controversial spending view as distorted and complete nonsense. That's exactly why I pointed out, on the basis of the IFS report, we can now be reasonably certain that the arguments we've been putting forward as Scotland being in a stronger fiscal position than the rest of the United Kingdom are actually validated over the last 5 years. What happens over the next 50 years will depend on the policies pursued in this country, and that in turn will depend as to whether we've got control of the policies pursued in the country. Therefore, I say let's get control of these economic levers. Let's increase productivity, increase our exports, invest in our economy. Let's grow the Scottish economy and move forward to that better future.
Joanne Lamont.
The Minister is not just guilty of selective quoting, he's guilty of selective thinking. The problem with the First Minister, he says the IFS is helpful, but only to the extent that it agrees with him. Now, we know the backbenchers are only helpful to the First Minister when they agree with him. He really ought to look at what all of the IFS studies and take it on board. Now, just like when he started his campaign, the First Minister is going to the cinema on Tuesday. What's he going to see? Historic Day 5, or Honey, I Shrunk the Fiscal Gap. If the First Minister is to be believed, we won't just be a new country after independence, he'll invent a new arithmetic. While in every other country in the world, the choice is between tax rises or cuts in spending. Alex-Salmond will have you believe we are the only country where the future is this. How big a tax cut can we give to big business, and how much more can we spend on good things? Isn't it the case that at the very heart of next week's White Paper, and at the heart of everything this government does, is this belief that if the First Minister and his colleagues say something confidently and often enough, no matter how wrong it is, the people of Scotland will be daft enough to believe it?
First Minister.
Let me try another quote from the IFS, which Joanne Lamont will say is selective, but this is what they say, which I think actually underlines the points I've been making. They acknowledge that the factors in the report are inherently uncertain, could also evolve differently if Scotland were independent rather than part of the UK. In addition, they could be substantially affected by policies chosen by the government of an independent Scotland. Now, that is basically what I'm saying. Now, Joanne Lamont says you have to take the choices between cutting spending and increasing taxation. That would be the choice, if that is the Labour Party's position, according to the IFS OBR analysis, with a deficit for every single one of the next 50 years. We know now, if Joanne Lamont's got any influence, what exactly the policy of the next Labour government is going to be on that particular argument. I don't think that Joanne Lamont's in a particularly good position either to talk about economic advisers or the real world. Fred Goodwin was the economic adviser to Alistair Darling, not to me. The current economic adviser to the Labour Party is the Reverend Paul Flowers, and I don't think that's going to give us a tremendous indication of what the future should hold. And in terms of the real world, what's happening in the real world at the present moment is that Labour figure after Labour figure is saying exactly what they think of the Labour Party's current coalition with the Tories. For example, the Labour Party chairperson, Labour activists simply can't stomach working alongside the Conservatives in the No campaign. In the real world, key Labour figures like Alec Mawson are coming out in favour of the Yes campaign. That's what's happening in the real world. And as the White Paper is launched next week, then that campaign will be reinforced. Why? Because this party, this government, has ambition for this country. We think we can invest in the future, grow the economy and give all our people a decent future.
Question 2, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when he'll next meet the Secretary of State for Scotland.
First Minister.
No plans near future.
Ruth Davidson.
Presiding Officer, nothing that's been said in the last quarter of an hour takes away from the fact that the IFS report said clearly that an independent Scotland would start life with such a gap in its balance sheet that either taxes would have to rise or spending would have to be slashed. Now, those are similar findings to the OBR, to the CPPR, to the National Institute of Social and Economic Research, to the CBI, to the David Hume Institute, and any number of academics and economists that you care to mention. So can I ask the First Minister, why he thinks that the IFS came to such conclusions? Is it part of some vast right-wing conspiracy, or had they just done the sums?
First Minister.
Well, I think Ruth Davidson's interpretation is entirely wrong. The IFS point is not that the current budgetary fiscal position of Scotland is worse than the United Kingdom. As I've just read out, they actually say it's better than that of the United Kingdom. Indeed, under their optimistic scenario, it will be better up until 2040, according to the IFS figures. What they argue is that Scotland faces the challenges of every European economy. They say an ageing population is going to cause considerable difficulty. I would argue that the answer to that is to grow the Scottish population by allowing people who want to work in this country, people who have grown up in this country, the opportunity to work in their own country, and by allowing these many thousands of skilled people who want to work in Scotland, as opposed to being thrown out by Ruth Davidson's colleagues south of the border. So if we're going to address the long-term challenges that the IFS indicate, we know full well what waits us in the United Kingdom. Perhaps some of these things would come to pass if that is what happens in the United Kingdom. With the policy levers of an independent Scotland with ambition for this country, we can create a new and better future for ourselves.
Ms Davidson.
Presiding Officer, picking out half a sentence from page 11 and repeating it again and again might be a life raft of a debating point, but it doesn't change the headline message of the IFS reports, which was that even to begin to balance the books of an independent Scotland, there must be a huge spending cut or a tax rise equivalent to VAT of 27% or a 9% hike in income tax. And the inconvenient truth for the First Minister is that the IFS is not alone in its analysis. Independent think tanks, academics, economists, financial experts, business groups, trade bodies, all lining up and saying the same things. The books don't balance, the currency isn't secure, and the oil is a finite resource. All of them.
Order! Order! Let's hear Ms Davidson. Order.
All of them on one side of the argument, and on the other, all alone, is the First Minister, sticking his fingers in his ears, making fag packet promises, and with an economic plan with more holes in it than Ramsay Nesbitt's string vest. All of the independent experts, all of them saying one thing, Alex-Salmond saying another. So let me ask him, why should voters close their eyes, cross their fingers and take a punt on the First Minister's far-fetched claims?
First Minister.
Well, the only thing that Ruth Davidson worked out was she didn't say we weren't going to get Doctor Who, which I understand from the Sun newspaper this morning. Unfortunately, Ruth Davidson, it's actually been simultaneously broadcast in 50 countries, according to the BBC. I'm underestimating 75 countries, an increase of 25 since I started this sentence. So I think all of the dismal forecasts of Ruth Davidson require to be challenged. But can I just say, I know the Tory party, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister have attacked IFS figures in the past. I'm not doing that. I'm just pointing out what the IFS themselves have said. Ruth Davidson cited the fact that in the IFS report it validates something that she's never publicly admitted, as far as I know, that Scotland more than pays its way for the United Kingdom, and over the last 5 years, many billions of pounds that we could have used to invest in the Scottish economy have gone south in every sense of the term. So that's in the IFS report. Now, I know it's an inconvenient truth, but there it is in the IFS report. Now, let's talk about what the IFS says about the future. This is Paul Johnson, the Director of the IFS. What this is saying is, in order to avoid problems somewhere down the road, you need to make some changes in the short run. These are perfectly plausible changes, a few percent of national income, smaller than actually what has happened or what is happening at the moment over the current period. As I say, this is not unusual among developed countries. Developed countries as a whole are facing these kinds of challenges. Now, I've indicated how we in this party, this government, would face these challenges in an independent Scotland. We'd grow the economy, we'd grow the tax base of the country by growing the economy. I agree, if we stay with the United Kingdom, if we allow the Home Office to fling out talented people who want to work in this country, if we deny young Scots the opportunity to work in their own country, then I have no doubt the future is dismal for Scotland, as indicated by some of the IFS's forecast. But there is an alternative, and that alternative is to believe in the resources and the ability of the people of this country, invest in that future and grow the economy. Ruth Davison, remarkably for a Conservative Party politician, said she felt I was alone in these forecasts. Well, the reason I'm here is that by a substantial, overwhelming verdict to the Scottish people, they elected this government. And they gave their verdict time and time again on the prospects of the Conservative Party in Scotland. When Joanne Lamont said about the ageing profile of Scotland, I thought she was talking about the Conservative Party in terms of its support. Now, the reason this government was elected is people of Scotland have the nous to know that this is a country with ingenuity and ability. Our people are an ingenious and ingenious people. We have the ability among our people. They also know that having vast natural resources in oil and gas is an asset, not a liability. And if you combine these two things of an ingenious population and vast natural resources, then you can make a success of your economy. And it's that ambition and belief which will be reflected in the White Paper and reflected in the votes of the people of Scotland next year.
Very briefly, Councillor McNeill.
The First Minister will be aware that on Tuesday 280 homes in Greenock lost their power and 4 houses were set on fire, putting people's lives at risk due to the reckless conduct of metal thieves. Indeed, the consequences go on, in that all the circuit boards of the central heating boilers have been blown as well, and this will have to be replaced possibly by a significant investment by the housing social landlord and homeowners. This is a part, as he knows, of a growing trend. Scottish Power have reported that over 800 substations now have been subject to attack since 2011, and 70,000 homes in Scotland have been affected. While we appreciate the Scottish Government's looking at legislation, and legislation can work to address these issues, can he give us an assurance that that legislation will be brought forward as soon as possible, and in the meantime ensure coordinated action between the police and Scottish Power to ensure that we take action against these reckless people who are putting people's lives in danger?
First Minister.
Yeah, I'm very much aware of the incident and aware of not just the inconvenience but the danger that would cause to his constituents by a quite disgraceful theft of metal affecting the power lines and power supply. I can give them that assurance. We'll bring forward legislation on the licensing bill at the earliest opportunity. But more than that, in terms of current action, both in terms of police action and in terms of action which is coordinated by Police Scotland and the Transport Police, but also in terms of the Justice Secretary's meeting shortly with Scottish Power, specifically on the issue of the protection and security of power lines, that action will be taken. And I agree with them. It's a very serious situation. I think what makes it all the more galling is the actual cost or the value of the theft was some tens of pounds. But it put the lives of hundreds of people into substantial inconvenience and some families into substantial danger. That's what makes it all the more deplorable.
Question 3, Will Rennie.
To ask the First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Cabinet.
First Minister.
Issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Will Rennie.
Does the First Minister think police officers are being taken off the streets to backfill civilian jobs?
First Minister.
No, I agree with what the Chief Constable has said on a number of occasions. That's not the policy of Police Scotland.
Will Rennie.
If he had actually read what the Chief Constable had said yesterday, he would not have said just what he has said to the Chamber. He was actually a lot more clear about this before as well, because he said it was utter nonsense in the past. But the Chief Constable said yesterday that it was happening on a daily basis. On a daily basis, he said it was happening. So now it's confirmed by the Chief Constable. Police officers are being taken off the streets. Add to that list police stations shutting to the public, control rooms closing. Audit Scotland have been scathing. Chiefs at loggerheads and a police authority that says it just does not know where the savings will come from. And this grand mess was something Kenny McCaskill said was a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Isn't that a warning to people that the next time these people try to sell us something that is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, they might not believe a word they say.
First Minister.
I say to Willie Rennie, unfortunately for him both, I've read the report from the Audit Committee yesterday, and indeed I have the full quote before me. He quoted two words of the quote. The actual full quote is, "We do not have a policy or strategy to backfill support staff for police officers. Of course it happens on a daily basis, but it's not part of a plan." Which goes along with, I must repeat, we do not have a strategy or plan to backfill police staff roles with police officers. I want as many officers as possible to be on the streets in an operational role. Now, these are the quotes of the Chief Constable, not the ones, the two words that Willie Rennie tried to take out of context. The difficulty for Willie Rennie in the attitude of police reform is that most people would regard the advent of Police Scotland and the ability to merge 10 organisations into one as making very substantial achievements indeed. Most people would regard the record number of police officers in the streets and communities of Scotland, and if it were up to Willie Rennie, they wouldn't be there at the present moment. Most people would regard a 39-year low in recorded crime as a substantial achievement. And if they want to look for an alternative to the policies which are being pursued in Scotland, that's of reinforcing the front line, putting the emphasis not in the back office but on the front line, people in communities. If they want to look for an alternative, they only need to glance south of the border, what happens under the control of Willie Rennie's colleagues, where England is about to lose almost as many police officers as the record numbers that Scotland now has.
I've now got 3 questions. Can I ask that the questions be as brief as possible and the answers as brief as possible to First Minister? Question 4, Kenneth Gibson.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the report by the Institute of Fiscal Studies on the fiscal sustainability of an independent Scotland.
First Minister.
Well, as I said, given that the same forecasts from the IFS-OBR say that UK will run a fiscal deficit in each of the next 50 years, then perhaps that we shouldn't be surprised at the long-term nature of the forecast. I believe independence is the key to changing the outcome, and I pointed out earlier on the IFS acknowledged in the report that the overall 50-year prognosis would be substantially affected by the policies chosen by the Government of an independent Scotland. We choose policies for growth and achievement. That is what makes the difference.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the First Minister for his reply. I spoke to IFS Director Paul Johnson on Tuesday, and he admitted that the IFS has carried out no work whatsoever on the impact of the UK leaving the EU following that proposed 2017 referendum. Does he agree that this would be a better focus for the IFS than attempting to predict Scotland's economic circumstances half a century into the future, and that what the IFS did get right was confirmation that Scotland's economy performs better than the UK's at present, with a relative budget surplus of £12.6 billion over the last 5 years, whilst an independent Scotland could reform the tax system to boost the economy and increase growth?
First Minister.
That and the first bit in particular, validated in the IFS report, now presumably universally accepted across this chamber, that is exactly what Scotland has lost out over the last 5 years, where we've been in a consistently stronger fiscal position than the UK as a whole, but been unable to use these massive resources for the benefit of the Scottish economy. As we've already discussed in the debate, I believe in changing these parameters, these population forecasts, by investing in the future of the economy. I think there's any number of young Scots who want to work in this economy if they're given the choice to do so. I think it is a foolish and mistaken policy to fling people out of the country when they want to commit themselves to Scotland. So I think we can rise to these challenges. I think we can invest in the future. I think we can grow this economy, and that is an altogether more convincing prospect than the dismal prospects offered by the unionist parties, who would keep us in the current box of low growth and low aspiration in Scotland.
Question 5, Rhoda Grant.
To ask the First Minister when the Scottish Government will bring forward plans to extend legislation to make wilful neglect of patients a criminal offence.
First Minister.
And I thank Rhoda Grant for giving me the opportunity to address this question, because it's hugely important. That recommendation of wilful neglect becoming a criminal offence was made by the world-renowned patient safety expert Professor Don Berwick on how the safety of patients in NHS England could be improved in the wake of the Mid-Staffordshire scandal. Now, Rhoda Grant will be aware that wilful neglect is already an offence when related to mental health patients in Scotland, and we are examining the best legislative manner in which to extend this protection to all patients. And the Cabinet Secretary for Health will be updating Parliament before the end of the year on how we can take this forward.
Rhoda Grant.
The First Minister will be aware of Scottish Labour's proposal to create an integrated health and social care inspectorate that is independent of government, accessible to staff and patients, allowing them to raise their concerns, and that has the powers to take tough, decisive action. Can you explain to us why he has failed to consider our proposal so far?
Minister.
All proposals are considered. Integration of health and social care is hugely important, and we'll be looking at all proposals as we carry forward that policy. But I think Rhoda Grant has been very unfair to the achievements of the Scottish Health Service in terms of patient safety. And given these were recommendations of Professor Don Berwick, perhaps we should look about what Professor Don Berwick says about patient safety in Scotland. And I quote, "The Scottish Patient Safety Programme is without doubt one of the most ambitious patient safety initiatives in the world. National in scale, bold in aims, disciplined in science, aligned towards a common vision, making Scotland the safest nation on earth from the viewpoint of health care." That is the view of the person whose recommendations Rhoda Grant has asked us to consider. Obviously, we're going to consider favourably that recommendation, because of the 10 key recommendations, 9 of them are already in place in Scotland, have been in place as part of the Patient Safety Programme, and that 10th one, which Rhoda Grant asked me about, is one which we'll consider very positively, so as we can live up to Professor Don Berwick's estimation of patient safety in Scotland.
Question 6, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government is doing to ensure that statistics presented by Police Scotland are accurate.
First Minister.
Well, Scotland is now a safer place, as we know, supported by the 1,000 additional officers, as opposed to what's happening south of the border. But there's a well-established system in place to ensure consistent and accurate reporting of police data from both the 8 legacy police forces and indeed Police Scotland. The Scottish Crime Recording Standard, introduced in 2004, provides a victim-orientated approach and ensures the uniformity in crime reporting practices throughout Scotland. Compliance with the standard is reviewed by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary for Scotland. That's why we're working closely with SPA and Police Scotland to ensure that published Police Scotland management information is always robust.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank the First Minister for his response, but he will know that this week senior police officers have spoken out against a target culture in the centralised Police Scotland. What assurances can he give us that techniques such as gaming are not being used to present a picture of police activity and recorded crime which is less than accurate?
First Minister.
I think the assurance I can give is, because of what I've said to Murdo Fraser, we can have confidence in the statistics that Police Scotland produce, and indeed the legacy forces that we had beforehand. I really would think, given the excellence of these statistics, that Murdo Fraser might just accept that there are more than 1,000 extra police in the streets of Scotland, as opposed to the thousands who have been made redundant south of the border. Recorded crime is at a 39-year low. That our police officers throughout Scotland are doing an excellent job on behalf of the people of Scotland. And I have to say, I know I comment on the trials and tribulations of the Conservative Party, cabinet ministers and all the rest of it, but there is a fundamental breakdown in trust between the UK Government and the police service, just as there is a fundamental breakdown in trust between the UK Government and the fire service. Has Murdo Fraser ever wondered why that trust is intact in Scotland? Because we value and regard the work of our uniformed services, unlike his colleagues south of the border.
That ends First Minister's questions. We now move to members' business. I'm going to allow a short pause to allow members who are not participating in the debate to leave, and for the gallery to clear before we move on to the members' business.